Hi, everyone. It looks like it is 2 o'clock here and some more folks are coming in. So we'll kind of get started here just to get going with our time. But I know it's always, you go in at 2 and you sign into the Zoom link and then it always takes a minute and then your audio's not working. And, there's all kinds of fun stuff that happens these days on Zoom. But thank you all for joining here today for our IWIN Community of Practice for January. Our topic today is advancing equity through work-based learning. We're going to do a little bit of context setting, some introductions in the chat. And I was going to introduce them, but they already put their info in there. So I'm excited. Edith on our team, if you see in the chat, and you can see on video here too, is our very recent, just started on Tuesday, high school intern. So they'll be working with us through July here at Ed Systems. We're so excited to have them. And Edith, I won't put you on the spot, but if you want to say a little bit about yourself in the chat or out loud, we definitely welcome you to do so. But we're very excited to have you here engaging in this work with us as a team.
No, I just want to say thank you for having me, and I'm ready to get to work and just to know all of you.
Thank you, Edith. And so would love to know too, who's here in the room today. So as you're in the room, as you're coming into the room here, just in the chat, if you could write your name, title, organization, and it's a new year, new me, new us. If there's something you're looking forward to in 2021, I myself went ahead and just booked a camping trip in July and a little vacation spot in Michigan for my daughter's birthday in July. I'm like, we're going to do some form of vacation this year, just a little something to look forward to and get outside a bit. But again, happy to have you all here today. Thank you for joining. So your name, title, organization, something you're looking forward to in the chat. And just some little logistical reminders, as always, if you can please mute your computers and your phones if you have that too during the presentation. We are going to have time for Q&A after each presentation. And if you've been on these IWIN sessions before, we definitely use the chat right a bit. This very much is a co-learning and sharing space. So as we're going through presentations, if it brings up something for you about a question, a resource that you have, a best practice or a model that please feel free to put that in the chat. I know it's always fun after these sessions to look back in the chat and see how folks were already engaging, even just within that space and learning from one another beyond even what's shared in the presentation. So I'm excited to see all you here. I see some familiar faces, some new faces. And as always, it's just really exciting to have a whole group of people here learning and sharing with one another. Our plan for today, generally, we're going to have 2 presentations, one from Caroline DeAndrea, who some of you have been introduced to, but they are another member of our team who's really working intentionally on work-based learning and supporting that with research and production of materials. They've been really key in starting to build a team-based challenge resource bank that will be launching here to the group in a couple of months. 2-3 months, we'll see. But we also really have some special presenters here today from Here to Here who are going to discuss a policy brief and some different learnings that they've had, some data, some recommendations about how work-based learning really can address today's opportunity gaps and how connected it is to educational attainment and equity for students. The goal today really is to get some time. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, and it's really important to spend some time reflecting and thinking through your insights and your questions on this content. And so we'll spend some time, maybe about 5 minutes, in breakout groups towards the end, or like I kind of mentioned earlier, maybe we'll find that we're having a really robust large group conversation with questions and conversations, and it might make more sense to stay as a large group. So we'll just kind of see as it goes. And then just some closing and next steps. I got a quick poll for you all and some items that are upcoming. So before I turn it over to Caroline, we reviewed this at our IWIN kickoff, but here's a team at Ed Systems, and I know in many communities and spaces who are on this call, really starting to think intentionally and take active steps about how we're reflecting, learning, and making racial equity really tangible in our work. And so seeking to understand how we influence systems, and how that impacts students and families, and really identify ways to measure those efforts and make changes in the work that we do, and examine our own priorities and efforts. And I know this is work that's happening in communities across the state and nation as well. And that ties in then to these goals of IWIN. So where we're really coming together as a space about how are we looking at innovative models for work-based learning. This year we have a big focus on virtual work-based learning and what some of those models are, but as you've seen on some of our former calls, a lot of the things we're talking about, virtual or not, are really adaptable and applicable to all forms and models of work-based learning. And this one here, right, and it's a conversation that we're having today about how do we create sustainable, high-quality models that ultimately provide broader and more equitable access to work-based learning with a focus and especially thinking about what it means to build social capital for Black and Latinx students. And I know Caroline will talk about this in their presentation, and then our Here to Hear presenters too will talk about this in theirs. And as always, like I mentioned, it's building connections too between you all. So please, again, use the chat as much as you want, write in there, type in there, share stuff, put in links. It's always fun to see that happening. And then thinking too as a group, where are there pieces where we can start to advocate for or really think intentionally about some state policy changes or support systems here in Illinois. And with that, I will turn it over to Caroline.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, everyone. As Heather mentioned, my name's Caroline DeAndrea. I've been with Ed Systems since November, really working on work-based learning, research and materials, and really looking forward to working with you all and getting to know you and your work a bit more. So like Heather was saying, since today's all about equity, we wanted to make sure we touched on the impacts on equity due to COVID. And so the Brookings Institute released a report in November about work-based learning, equity, and COVID called Work-Based Learning Can Advance Equity and Opportunity for America's Young People. And so we just wanted to dive into some key items from the report. So the Brookings Institute, through their research, really identified 3 elements that are critical to work-based learning opportunities. And so the first one is positive relationships with adults support growth and development. And so research on middle and high school students finds that active intervention is really critical to helping develop relationships take root, especially for low-income youth. The third element here is social capital that provides information and contacts regarding employment. And our other presenters later on are going to dive into social capital a bit more. But for example, here, through this report, one study found that students who obtain jobs with the help of their high schools have higher earnings 9 years later. And the Brookings Institute suggested that this could be because their career and technical education teachers, through their relationships with employers, were able to bridge that gap in students' networks and connect them to people and employment opportunities they otherwise would not have access to. And then the third element here is work experiences that offer opportunities for hands-on learning and expose young people to new environments and expectations. And while relationships can and should form between young people and adults at every stage of that work-based learning continuum, those repeated and sustained interactions that are characteristic of the more maybe like time-consuming phases, like what we might think of as apprenticeships, really provide a meaningful opportunity for programs to facilitate those relationships between students and adults. And the Brookings Institute refers to those as the relationship zone. And so I thought that that was a nice way to look at that opportunity to create those relationships as well. Great, thanks, Heather. So one quote that I wanted to pull out directly from the report is this on the slide here, which says, given the contribution that work-based learning can make to greater equity in education, workforce development, and employment for young people from marginalized communities, it is particularly important at this time. It would be a mistake to shelve this tested vehicle for expanding career-related opportunity. And so this quote and the report in general really finds itself situated in the context of acknowledging the limited capacity that teachers, that educators, staff have to focus on work-based learning with the rapid pivots to remote learning and all of the uncertainties that come with that, but really recognizing how these work-based learning opportunities are more important than ever before. So now we really want to look at how COVID has impacted the workforce that our students are entering. And as the report says, the country's last recession hit young people particularly hard, and history will likely repeat itself in the COVID-19 downturn. And so the report listed the unemployment rates from October of this past year in 2020, and overall unemployment was at 6.9%. But you'll see that was doubled for 16 to 19-year-olds, still high at 10.8% for 20 to 24-year-olds. And then for 25-year-olds and older was a little below the average at 6.2%. So we're really seeing the impacts of COVID on unemployment for young people. And part of this is because young adults are disproportionately likely to work in industries affected by social distancing, such as retail, hospitality, food service, industries like that. And then thinking about racial ethnic breakdowns for unemployment too, unfortunately, unemployment rates tend to be higher for people who are Black or Latino. And so this data, which is pre-COVID in 2019, we see these inequities here. So thinking specifically about teenagers in 2019, the unemployment rate was 20.7% for Black teens, 15.4% for Latino or Hispanic teens, and then it keeps dropping down a bit, 11.7% for white teens and 8.2% for Asian American teens. So we're really seeing the discrepancies and inequities there between racial and ethnic groups. And then just thinking about this for not teenagers, but for young adults, so that's the 20 to 24 age range, still unemployment is typically higher for Black and Latino young people. So it's in 2019 was 11.5% for Black workers, 6.6% for Latino or Hispanic workers, and then 5.8% for both white and Asian workers. So again, we're seeing those discrepancies and inequities hold true for teenagers and young adults as well. And so because of those inequities that existed across race and ethnicity before COVID, and the inequities that are exacerbated by COVID for young people of color, now what? And so the Brookings Institute really emphasizes relationships and how schools and organizations can move forward in this work. And the report says that work-based learning programs really need two components to be successful. And the first is, and we talked about this a little bit before, opportunities for young people to interact with adults who can provide guidance, assistance, and connections. And then the second one is opportunities for young people to learn skills and behaviors that enable them to build and enhance their relationship with others. And so both of these components really have practical implications for organizations, most generally in how they allocate resources. So this report found that those relationship building processes need to be explicit and intentional. And some examples of that can be reflected in job descriptions, in staff training, performance measurement, and particularly important staff time. And all of this is even more needed in this, virtual COVID world that we're finding ourselves in. So that was just an overview of some of the key takeaways from the report and an opportunity, to really get us thinking about how COVID is impacting equity in work-based learning. So if there's any questions related to this report, I'm not sure if anything came up in the chat, but happy to discuss them now. This is the link to the full report where folks can feel free to dive in a bit more if they would like. Are there any questions right now?
I did just see the one comment from Daryl in the chat about attendance, and that is going to be something our next presenters actually dive into a bit. to see how work-based learning can impact those attendance rates. And I don't know if Cheryl, you want to share any of that at this time, but.
I don't know. No, I mean, it's a dissertation, so I don't really want to, I could bore you guys for days and days, but just everything Caroline shared is spot on. I focused on a couple of things, attendance being one of them, GPAs as a comparison point, and likeliness of going to a second year institute, and all statistically significant outcomes, you know, for those students that were involved in work-based learning programs. We have a pretty robust work-based learning program, so I was able to capture data for a 3-year period and compare to students in the program and students not in the program. I felt like I got a you know, again, a small rural Illinois comparison, but it was a good comparison with similar students and similar experiences. So can't say enough about work-based learning.
Thank you, Daryl. Thanks for sharing all that. All right, well, like Heather has mentioned, there'll be plenty of time for questions and more discussion and interaction later on. But for right now, I'm going to turn it to our other presenters for the day, Lazar and Latoya from Here to Here.
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for that overview of the research from Brookings. Martha Ross, I know, is the lead author, and I've worked with her for years. She's just terrific, a great researcher, a great person, and our work has really mirrored each other over the past few years for which I've been really fortunate. So this is a report that we put out in January, and my colleague and I, Latoya, who's our student policy advisor and is a high school student here in New York City, we'll talk about it a little bit. But it's really taking some of the things that you just heard and really getting down a little bit more into the details. So we'll take around 10 minutes, hopefully not too much more than that, to present, and then we will take some questions. Yes, let's advance. So really I come to this work, I've been at Here to Here, which is an intermediary in New York City that is really devoted to expanding braided pathways or work and learning in high school and post-secondary. And I come to this work really through school segregation work, which I did a lot of desegregation work in New York City. And as that field has sort of matured, I sort of came to really see the real differences in the schools that we were talking about. We're really in the actualization of education. I think whether you're not a fan of NCLB, I do think over the past 10 to 15 years, you know, we've gotten to the point where we are able to at least get students to graduate at better rates. You know, really, how do you take what's the next level of education, and how are young people from different communities able to actualize their education and use it to empower them to become consumers, particularly of post-secondary education, rather than become consumed by it, was a real equity gap, and we'll dig into that a little bit. How work-based learning can really serve as a way to level the playing field, and some recommendations for policy and practice. So you can, next slide. So again, I'm Lazar. Latoya is with me. Latoya, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Latoya Beecham, and I'm the student policy advisor for Here to Here. I'm also a junior at Hero High School, and I'm also a part of Teen State Charge.
Terrific. So you can jump ahead. And so what I'll be doing, you know, so Latoya is our student policy advisor. I'll sort of talk a little bit about some research, and then Latoya will intermittently sort of just give her a reflection really as a student, you know, in schools every day, or on her laptop every day, as it may be these days, you know, what that looks like. So again, this is a report we put out in January, got some coverage in the Daily News, which, you know, and since then, you know, we've had some real traction, which we can talk about as a result of some of the media and some of the outreach we've been able to do. So, you know, the basis for this is some of the stuff you heard a little bit around social capital research and other, you know, students' networks, the ability for them to get exposed to a wide range of careers in colleges. You know, we're at a point where just graduating high school isn't enough. just going to college isn't enough, but really having a plan that actualizes you and really empowers you to go out and fulfill your sort of skills and interests is really, not equitably distributed right now. We see real different starting points for young people in those experiences. And that has to do with, do you have an aunt who's a lawyer? So you can check out a law firm. Do you have family that can support you to do an unpaid internship where you can try some things out? Do you have more resources where your parents are sending you to do Habitat for Humanity or community service programs? And what we heard from students is that their schools are really worsening those gaps and not really mitigating them. We heard from students so what we did for the research for this project was we interviewed dozens of students and really grouped them into higher and low income schools. And what our schools told us was really that those disparities were huge, that higher income schools are just so many more opportunities to participate in things outside of what are considered traditional academics, but are really driving their academic careers and outcomes. Latoya, do you want to talk a little bit about how you've seen that? Now, Latoya goes to a CTE high school, but it's also a P-Tech high school, which is a 9 through 14 school. Latoya, do you want to talk about your interests and how that connected you to your high school, and how your high school, which is a little bit unique, allows you to sort of try out some of those interests?
Definitely. So when I was first choosing my school, I had to think about what I wanted to do in the long run, but I know that I wanted to do something that had to do with either childcare, or whether it's pediatrics, which is really grabbing my eye, or like being a teacher, which is always a second option for me because I feel like that's also as great. So when I actually got accepted to my high school, a lot of the details that I learned that we are a 9 to 14 school, which that means we get different opportunities. And one of the opportunities are we are partnered with a college, which is Hostos College. So we do get the opportunities to get college classes from Hostos and go back and forth from Hostos and get those really work-based learning opportunities rooted into our schoolwork. So not only are we learning about like healthcare fields and different professions and different professionals in the healthcare field, but we're also working on ourselves in the meantime. So that's really like the highlighted part that I like about my school. So when I found out that like other schools don't get that, it's like, so how do they get access to those opportunities? How do they get the opportunity to build on themselves? So yeah, that's a little bit about my school.
Yes, and you can jump to the next slide. So what you hear from Latoya, which is really exciting, is that really, her school has allowed her to try out some certain interests, and then really, even a more broad sense, it's not about locking young people through work-based learning into a specific career from when they're young, but what you'll hear from Latoya as we move forward a little is some of the other internships she's had as a result of being in that school have sort of opened her world up and opened her confidence to where, now she's interested in public service and some other things that you'll hear about through some experiences. And just, it's not about locking students into a career, it's about opening them up and having them understand the options available to them and their own self-efficacy and opening their networks to things like that. So I'll go over some very quick data. We still see, these are just showing, racial equity gaps in New York City high schools. Our graduation rates have gone up for everybody, but they're still higher for white and Asian students. You can jump ahead. College going by race still has huge disparities, particularly when we look at college type. College going has increased for all groups in New York and across the country. Again, we're based in New York City, but these data are actually true across the country. But when you look at the type of college, there still are huge disparities with Black and Latino students in two-year colleges, which have lower outcomes than four-year colleges. These are data from the city of New York. Again, you can jump to the next slide. And so what is, what's causing this, and what is the result of this? And here's a student who's a Teens Take Charge is an activist group in New York, and this one interview we did with a student from Teens Take Charge is really saying like, look, his dad works intermittently as a retail worker. But compare him to a student who's an engineer, lawyer, or doctor, and just those connections that are available to him to try things out, references on resumes, references for jobs, references for college, and things like that. You can move to the next slide. So again, I won't go through what work-based learning is because we heard it a little bit before, and you guys are probably more experts than I am. So why don't we jump ahead? And so the tip of the spear for us has been summer jobs. New York City has a big publicly funded summer jobs program, but it's totally disconnected what happens in school. And so for us, it's about turning high school into a 12-month program, 10 months that are not optional, that are academic, but where work-based learning is worked in, but then an optional paid summer internship that's actually connected to those experiences during the school year, that is crafted in partnership with the school and a community-based organization to let students experience, try out some of their interests. And, what you hear from students is really what they learn from those experiences. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with the hard skills of those jobs, but a lot of these, what we call soft skills that are going to be useful, not just in careers, but really in college as well. And I'll get to some of our research on college retention and how internships and work really support that. But, LaToya, I don't know if you may know Crystal actually, but I don't whether or not you do, can you reflect a little bit about how, here she's talking about how just her internship gave her a little more self-efficacy, a little more feeling of like, I can solve problems on my own. How have your sort of experiences and internships and some of the things you've done that have weaved into your school experience, but aren't necessarily like formal school, helped you, in your sort of skills in general?
I definitely feel like a lot of skills that I've gained, mostly that like aren't really like focused like in school, are more like my soft skills and a couple of my hard skills, but like just like public speaking and different things like that, and making sure I'm able to like make connections when it comes to like networking and building my outer circles. I feel like those have been like the most have made the most impact on me, because I feel like without those internships or also those summer jobs, I don't think I would have been able to do that, especially since like I'm talking to like really well right now. And I feel like at the beginning of like my freshman year, I wasn't so great at that. And I feel like over the summer, especially with the whole SYP campaign and like my internship with Here to Here, I've been learning a lot, and I've just been able to grow like with me as a person and build on those different skills.
And which I think we all can tell from your speaking here. So we'll get a little bit to that internship in a second, but let's jump ahead a little bit. And again, I won't go through all of these, but these are, just again, from the interviews in our report, really just, students just talking about how, students also don't know what they don't know. And so, what we found is really, talking to young people from low-income schools where they don't have the resources to offer some of these things, it's not until they hear about that those are actually things that other people get in high schools or part of other people's experiences. It can be really shocking to them. So let's jump ahead a little bit. And that report is really based on the voices of young people. So again, research does show us, we have the Summer Youth Employment Program in New York City, which LaToya talked about. Has so much demand. 150,000 young people apply for 70,000 slots, that we're able to use a randomized controlled trial based on the lottery for acceptance to compare outcomes of students who are in it and not, and particularly for the ones in the school-based model, which connects to school. And we have seen that young people that do internships that are connected to their school have much better attendance the next year, better graduation rates, and better test scores. They say they feel more engaged. So again, this is not about doing stuff that helps them outside of school, but really also really pushing those school outcomes and the accountability metrics and regimes that are imposed upon schools already. And the principals that get it in our network and get it in what we work with and superintendents see this. And our challenge is really, how do we get other educators and leaders to see this as a priority and not something on the side? In the same way that I think we've come to social emotional learning as something that supports academic outcomes. Can we do the same thing around work-based learning and the real connections between the two? And for me, the thing I find really interesting is in college, an internship in a field is far more predictive of getting a job in that field than a major in that field. Or your grades in that field. Really hands-on experience matters. And I think we all know that. Next slide. And so again, this is just another quote from a young person really talking about, our title of report is One Step Closer, because he really saw his internship as taking him one step closer to what he wants to be in life. And jump ahead. You know, we had a student researcher do dozens of interviews, and when I got her to really say, okay, if you had to take all your research and into 2 sentences, and I know I'm going on a little long here, what would be your number one conclusion? And she said, well, at the end of the day, young people in higher income schools and schools that are not segregated and completely Black and Latino, but either mixed or predominantly white and Asian, those students think high school is supposed to help them graduate, help them figure out who they are, and help them build a resume to compete. And students at lower income schools think high school is just there to help them graduate. And that to me is the equity difference. That is just a huge difference in what school is about. And, you know, I think, so Latoya, you know, I think you know this from the ground and your experience in Teens Take Charge, when you come across young people from different backgrounds and who go to different types of schools, how has that sort of disparity, how have you seen that? Was that something that surprised you? Did you know that everybody, you know, you've then pushed to make equity a bigger issue in a lot of ways in schools. How have you seen sort of some of these disparities and how work-based learning can sort of support, you know, addressing them a bit?
Definitely. I feel like throughout like my whole, like ever since 9th grade, and when I got like more into like Here to Here and Teens Take Charge, I've learned a lot about like work-based learning and the different opportunities that other people don't get. And also this talked about this a little bit in the Times article, but when I have this friend, when I was I'm trying to remember the name. I can't remember the name. But first I had this opportunity to like, I'm so sorry.
You're good. Take a second. Do you want to jump a slide? Can we jump to the next slide?
Definitely. I'll come back to it, but I really want to say this.
Okay. You good?
Oh, we could jump to the next slide. When I think of the name, I'll talk about it.
Sounds good. So I want us to get to conversation a little bit, but you know, our recommendations really are on what we're trying to do Here to Here is really reshape our systems of education so they embed these types of experiences for young people, to really empower young people. You know, empowering K-12, that's, you know, making sure they're paid internships and experiences for young people that can be accredited, that can be a part of their learning experience and not on the side. Not an extra thing for schools to do, but can we take away some of the less useful accountability regimes and assessments and exams and things like that? And same thing in college, and really bring our employers into our schools in more powerful ways to complement and work alongside educators, whether it's through apprenticeship programs, whether it's through internships, but really make that, you know, make them partners. And you know, we have certainly enough people who opine from their own desks and offices and sofas about what education needs to be about, but really bringing people in together to work in a more productive way. Next slide.
Okay.
Go
I got it.
Go for it.
Okay. So I finally remember the name, and it's crazy I forgot. It's crazy it slipped my mind because like this was the first thing I ever did with Here to Here. But in the beginning, I was a Here to Here ambassador, and that was the first opportunity I had ever got. It was from my school, and then my school connected me with Here to Here, and I was like, okay, this seems super great. And then when I was a Here to Here ambassador, I was responsible for helping my peers get work-based learning opportunities and also get access to paid and unpaid internships. So when I would like tell my other peers about these opportunities, they'd be like, so you're giving out jobs? I'm like, no, not jobs. I'm basically like giving you the opportunity to learn what you need to learn. And I feel like this was like, it was like a lot of them were just like coming to me and they was like, oh my gosh, I heard that you're doing this and you're doing that. Can you please help me find this? Because I've been looking for this opportunity and looking for a chance where I can actually like grow mentally and like academically at the same time. So that was overall amazing for me because I was able to help them, but it really helped me see like how much of how the quality and funding that a lot of our schools get, because not a lot of our schools have the opportunity to provide all the students with these opportunities. So that was overall the first time I was like, okay, wow, this is real.
Yeah, and so, what's been interesting, and what I wanted to get to, which I think, is implicit in Latoya's point here, is that, so Latoya, she's in this health education and research occupations high school. Ostensibly, okay, she's going to go on to a career in health, but it's really opened her up to so many other experiences. Through having work-based learning, I think she's developed a level of confidence and ability to try out other interests and not pigeonhole herself. And so she was a paid intern with us to do advocacy around budget restoration last year after the fiscal crisis from COVID had our city's summer youth employment program completely canceled. 75,000 slots off the table. And so Latoya and 3 other students led this massive advocacy effort that restored $50 million and 35,000 slots into that program, which is just an incredible victory and incredible, and she worked her butt off. But I think, Latoya, do you want to talk about the extent to which, that is a part of your education? It wasn't just a separate job, it was something, and now it's affected how you feel about your future and some of the things you might both be able to do and want to do.
Yes, definitely. I just want to emphasize how big of an achievement this was for me and like my whole group. And just when I think more about this, it's just like the way it steers me and gears me is to like more about like thinking about like my community. And yes, like at the main focus of like beginning of like my high school, I was thinking more about like pediatrics and more like childcare, but now I'm thinking more like, whoa, like you could go big, like you could go super big, and like the sky isn't the limit. And this is what I want like everyone else to notice, that you have the potential, you just need to notice that it's there, and you just need the opportunity to notice that it's there. And that's like the whole thing about like this campaign that I learned. I learned skills about me. I learned that like I'm actually like really great at talking. Like this is super easy to me, but like sometimes I get in my head and overthink it a little bit. But it's really, I love like everything that I've learned throughout like everything that I've done with Teens Take Charge here to here in my school. It's just like they put you on that spot and give you what you need, and you just take it and you run with it.
And I really just think that that's what this work is in a nutshell. Thank you so much, Latoya. I think the last 2 minutes, if we could just have done that on loop for an hour, I think would have been as valuable as hearing me or anybody else speak. But really, that's what we're talking about here. That is the empowerment. That is the self-efficacy that work-based learning can provide that I think we struggle with in classrooms. So yeah, so we can jump ahead. It's through those experiences. Yeah, it was maybe because it had something to do with advocacy, but it is putting young people in positions to try stuff out, see a little success in the real world, connect to, adults as boring and as me, and, from which they will learn maybe one tiny small thing, and then move on to the next adult. So we also, I just threw this in here because we put out another paper in the fall with a group called the Hispanic Federation, where, it's the same thing. We interviewed tons of college non-completers and some completers, and really found that, so much of non-completion had to do with feelings of lack of engagement and relevancy and an inability to navigate big systems like paperwork and financial aid. We had so many students tell us they dropped out due to financial aid, but it turned out they actually had the financial aid. It's just they were unprepared and able to like meet with the offices and speak to adults who weren't their parent or their teacher. But it's, internships and experiences like this, Latoya is talking to a bunch of strange grown-ups right now and crushing it. So like it's really that we're trying to impart. So we can just move ahead to the end. But this is just a graphic from that report. What we're pushing for is, some of these are a little bit specific to New York, so I apologize, but really at high school level, more experiences for young people, internships, more support for schools to provide and support those, and through what we call work-based learning coordinators, who are staff that can really do that, and then assessment regimes that rely less on high stakes testing, really minimal high stakes testing, and more assessment of, do students have knowledge of self and knowledge of how the world, what they need to do in the world to achieve their goals, and that we think happens through those work-based learning experiences. And on the next slide, this in college and post-secondary, and those are our public systems in New York, CUNY and SUNY. Really expanding credit for work. 70% of New York college students work. 2% of it has anything to do with their field of interest or future interests. How do we package those experiences where we know they're getting great skills into a set of transferable 21st century skills that they get accredited for while they're getting paid? How do we value that and not say, oh no, you need to balance school and work? That can't be a question anymore. School and work need to balance themselves, and young people need to benefit from that, not to balance it themselves. More applied degree programs, and the career center shouldn't be something you visit second semester, senior year in the basement, but a place you go the first day of college, right? Help me chart a course to being the person I want to be, even if I don't know exactly what that is. A place you go on your visit to a college while you're still in high school, things like that. So I think that should bring us to the end. Latoya, anything? Yes, so this is the path forward for us is really doing advocacy with youth at the front. And this is Latoya being retweeted by AOC. I think you heard the name drop of Latoya, had a profile in the New York Times, and her on Zoom calls, and her really pushing for summer youth last year. We can go forward, really putting young people at the front of our advocacy for that work and making them. So would love to hear from you. Any final words, Latoya?
I feel like the only things that I would really add on and really want to say is just like the importance of youth voice and just like youth advocacy and youth realizing like their full, what's that word? You see, memory's not real good, but their full potential, and just that you can do this. And that's really all I want to do and pass on, is just like to motivate a young person anywhere in your life, and just let them know that they're capable of doing great things.
Well, Latoya, we're not that young, but we're young at heart, and you've definitely motivated us. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing today. The link is in here. I put in the chat. This will all be sent out afterwards, the presentation, and I'll link the different reports again we've discussed in the recording. But I heard Lazar and Latoya speak back in fall at the JFF conference, and I was like, oh man, I need to. And then we launched iWin, and I was like, all right, these two, they are speaking, and we need to bring them in. So thank you both again for coming here and sharing with us. Very cognizant of like making sure we're doing stuff that is meaningful and can be, maybe immediately or quickly or soon, or a plan to implement in your space. So I will kind of start to wrap us here again, respecting time for everyone. Something that we've also kind of thought about here in this space is having materials that you could kind of use right away. So put together some pieces here, and some of these are resources that we've developed, also links to other pieces, but something you could use right away with your participants, your students, or hosts, people who would be doing some mentoring or hosting a student or a participant for a work-based learning experience. But just some different pieces here for you all that you can link to and utilize. Also wanted to do a shout out here, if you all are not aware yet, the annual Illinois 60 by 25 Network Conference is coming up, and Lazar and Latoya definitely invite you, if you see some sessions that you're interested in, to please join. But I highlighted 4 sessions here that have a direct connection to work-based learning, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff as well in terms of transitional instruction, virtual learning, and just student support. So the link is here where you can go right into the agenda, and you'll actually register for each event. And it'll get added into your calendar. We're going all virtual this year. If you've been to the network conference before, it was in person, but I think we all know. So we are doing a virtual event, our first time. So, have some grace with us if there's technical difficulties and the presenters, but I think we've got a great plan in place. So looking forward to you all joining that as you are able. Also, just wanted to remind the group about our iWin site. So we have that on there if you want to share resources and also access resources. All of these recordings and materials are always uploaded to that site pretty quickly after. Again, a big shout out to Sarah Clark on our team who makes sure that gets done on there. If it were up to me, I don't know. So appreciate you, Sarah. And then just some next steps here. I'm going to launch a poll in a minute. As these are helpful, I also had this little brainchild idea about an iWin newsletter, but I want to make sure it's something you would actually care about receiving. I used to do them with the internship program I was with, and we would have kind of a a feature of the month, some different resources, some events that might be meaningful or connect you all. So I'm going to do a poll here about that. And also our next session. So in February, we won't have an official session like this. We will be doing the 60 by 25 conference. But we do, I think if Nikki James is still on here or not, I'll be presenting with them about virtual work-based learning and some research that they've done as well in that space. In March, though, we're going to have a data conversation. So that's what this poll is going to be about. And then in April, the plan is to do about partner engagement. How do you celebrate partners? How do you work collaboratively with partners? So again, always kind of looking for feedback on that. If those are the right topics, feel free to put anything in the chat. If you have feedback too, generally just about how these sessions are going, if there's something you'd like to see more of or less of, always would love to hear that as well. But thank you all again today for joining. Your exit slip is to submit your responses on the poll. And then that concludes our session. A big thank you again to all of our presenters, Caroline, Lazar, Latoya, and a big shout out to Edith, our high school intern who joined today and started Tuesday and is rapidly getting up to speed with all that's going on in the state. So thank you all again for joining. Have a wonderful rest of your day. It's almost the weekend, almost, and hope it's going well for you all.